I've never been good at being alone. Ever since I moved into this apartment, a sense of dread has lingered over me like a dark cloud. It's not just the normal kind of loneliness you feel when you're living away from home for the first time. This is different. This is like being watched every second of every night, even when you know no one else is supposed to be there. The apartment itself is nothing special. A small, one-bedroom place in an old building that creaks and groans like it's about to collapse at any moment. It's the kind of place that feels alive in its own unsettling way, as if the walls are whispering secrets just out of reach. I often find myself staring at the shadows dancing across the faded wallpaper, feeling a shiver crawl up my spine. It started as soon as I settled in. I remember unpacking my boxes, trying to convince myself that this place would be a fresh start, a chance to escape the suffocating grip of my past. But the longer I stayed, the more I realized that the walls seemed to have eyes, and the air was thick, an invisible presence. During the day, I could ignore it, lose myself in books and lectures. But at night, when the world outside fell silent, fear crept in like a slow, insidious poison. It wasn't long before I noticed the oddities. At first, they were small things, easy to brush off. A door slightly ajar when I was sure I'd closed it. Faint sound of footsteps above me when no one else lived there. I tried to rationalize it all, telling myself it was just the old building settling, the wind howling through the cracks. But one night, as I sat hunched over my desk, cramming for an upcoming exam, air shifted. Kind of shift that prickles your skin, making you hyper-aware of every creak and whisper in the dark. I felt a chill seep into my bones, and the faintest rustling noise started from the hallway, just outside my door. It was the soft, deliberate sound of footsteps, slow and methodical. My heart leapt into my throat, beating so loudly I was sure whoever, or whatever, was outside could hear it too. I sat frozen, listening to the footsteps pace back and forth, each step echoing like a sinister lullaby. After what felt like an eternity, I gathered enough courage to stand up and creep toward the door. I hesitated, my hand trembling as it hovered over the doorknob. But steps stopped. Silence. An oppressive silence that felt heavy and dangerous, like the calm before a storm. With a deep breath, I swung the door open, the hinges squealing in protest. Nothing. The hallway stretched out before me, empty and dimly lit. Just shadows and silence mocking my fear. I exhaled shakily, relief washing over me. Maybe it was just the wind, I thought, or perhaps the old pipes playing tricks on my mind. I closed the door and locked it, my heart still racing. But deep down, I knew. I knew that something was terribly wrong with this place. The feeling of being watched persisted, growing stronger each night, like eyes boring into my very soul. The shadows seemed darker, the silence more oppressive. And I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was haunting me in that apartment wasn't just a figment of my imagination. Living alone, you start to notice every little thing. Creak of the floorboards, the sigh of the wind, the groan of the walls. But here, in this apartment, it was different. It felt alive, aware, as if it was waiting for something or someone. And I was trapped, caught in its suffocating grip, unable to escape the creeping dread that whispered my name in the dead of night. I wish I could say that was the end of it. The truth is, that was only the beginning. The beginning of a descent into madness that I wouldn't wish upon my worst enemy. A nightmare that has followed me ever since, lurking in the shadows of my mind, refusing to let go. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just stress and exhaustion from the relentless demands of college life. Maybe it was sleep deprivation, the product of too many late nights and caffeine-fueled study sessions. But every time I turned my back, feeling returned, gnawing at my sanity, unraveling the threads of logic I desperately clung to. Weeks passed, and I found myself in a constant state of alertness, waiting for the next unexplainable event, the next breach in the fragile facade of normalcy I had constructed around myself. I started to doubt everything I heard, everything I saw, questioning whether I was losing touch with reality, or if there truly was something sinister lurking in the shadows. And then, one night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, hoping for the sweet release of sleep, I heard the unmistakable sound of a chair scraping across the floor in the kitchen. The noise was sudden and jarring, echoing through the stillness like a gunshot. My body went rigid, every nerve ending alight with fear. Someone was in my apartment, moving around as if they owned the place. I sat up slowly, the room spinning slightly as I strained to hear any other sound. The silence stretched out, taut and suffocating. I knew I should get up, grab something to defend myself, but a part of me was terrified of what I might find. The idea of confronting whatever, or whoever, was intruding on my sanctuary was more terrifying than anything I could imagine. Finally, summoning what little courage I had left, I slid out of bed and tiptoed toward the kitchen. Each step felt like a mile, my heart pounding in my ears. As I reached the doorway, I hesitated, peering into the dimly lit room, half expecting to see an intruder standing there, waiting for me. But once again, I found nothing. The kitchen was as I had left it, except for the chair pulled slightly away from the table, mocking me with its silent presence. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sandpaper, and approached the chair cautiously, half expecting it to move again under my gaze. It didn't, of course. It was just a chair, just wood and metal, yet it felt alive with a malice I couldn't comprehend. I stood there for a long moment, the oppressive silence wrapping around me like a shroud. I wanted to scream, to run, to escape this nightmare that seemed to have no end. I knew there was no escaping it. Not yet. The apartment had me trapped, ensnared in its web of fear, and all I could do was wait for the next move, the next whisper in the dark, that promised to unravel everything I thought I knew. And so I returned to my bed, heart heavy with dread, knowing that sleep would elude me once more. The night stretched on, an endless expanse of fear and uncertainty. As I lay there, listening to the shadows breathe and the darkness hum with secrets too terrible to comprehend. It's amazing what your mind can convince you of when you're truly alone. I used to believe the human imagination was limitless in its creativity, capable of crafting worlds from nothing more than fleeting thoughts. But after that night, I began to understand its darker side, capacity to twist reality into something almost unbearable. I had just returned from a long day at the library, the kind where every page seemed heavier than the last, where the words lost their meaning amidst the haze of exhaustion. My apartment felt colder than usual as I stepped inside, chills settling into my bones despite the thermostat's steady glow. I flicked on the lights, half expecting the shadows to leap out and swallow me whole. The place was silent, eerily so. Kind of silence that screams louder than any noise, pressing in from all sides. I shook off my unease, telling myself I was being ridiculous, and dropped my bag by the door, determined to get some rest. As I went about my nightly routine, the apartment seemed to watch me, its gaze never wavering. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the walls felt deliberate, as if they were announcing my presence to something lurking just beyond the edge of perception. I tried to ignore it, focused instead on the comforting hum of my toothbrush, familiar pattern of light across the bathroom mirror. But when I finally settled into bed, hoping for sleep to take me, I realized it wasn't just my imagination playing tricks. It was something far more sinister, something I couldn't explain or ignore. As I lay there, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, I heard it again, the soft, insistent tapping against the glass. I sat up slowly, the sheets slipping away as I strained to listen. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was unmistakable, deliberate in its rhythm. It came from the window across the room where the curtains hung still and silent. I felt a knot of fear tighten in my chest, dread pooling in my stomach as I considered my options. Tap, tap, tap. The noise continued, relentless and demanding, as if whatever was outside knew I was inside, waiting for me to notice. My heart raced, my mind screaming at me to stay put, to ignore it. But curiosity is a powerful thing. It has a way of overriding even the most primal instincts, driving us toward things we should avoid. Swallowing hard, I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood, floor cold beneath my feet. Each step toward the window felt like a leap into the unknown, my pulse thrumming in my ears like a war drum. I hesitated at the edge of the curtain, fingers trembling as they brushed against the fabric. Tap, tap, tap. I knew I had to look. Whatever was outside wouldn't just go away, wouldn't leave me in peace. Slowly, I pulled the curtain aside, the heavy fabric whispering against the rod. My breath caught in my throat as my gaze fell on the window. For a moment, time seemed to freeze, the world narrowing down to that single pane of glass. I expected darkness, maybe a stray branch or the reflection of streetlights, but what I saw defied explanation. There, staring back at me from the other side, was a face twisted and distorted in a grotesque grin, its eyes wide and unblinking. I stumbled back, my heart hammering against my ribs, a scream clawing its way up my throat. Face was impossibly close, despite the fact that I lived on the second floor. I blinked, hoping it would vanish, that it was nothing more than a trick of the light or a fevered nightmare. But it remained, watching me with a sinister intelligence, its features shifting and morphing like something out of a twisted fairy tale. The grin seemed to widen, teeth glinting like shards of glass in the moonlight. I felt a chill wash over me, paralyzing in its intensity, as if the very air around me had turned to ice. I stumbled backward, my legs barely supporting me as I scrambled for distance. The room spun, walls closing in, the oppressive silence shattered only by the sound of my own ragged breaths. Panic surged through me, my mind screaming to run, to get away, to escape this waking nightmare. As I turned, desperate to flee, a faint whisper brushed against my ears like a breath of wind carrying secrets. It was unintelligible, a murmur of words that slipped through my grasp. The tone was unmistakable. It was a warning, promise of things yet to come, spoken in a language older than time itself. I slammed the curtains shut, my hands shaking uncontrollably, and stumbled back to my bed. I pulled the blankets around me like a shield, as if they could ward off the terror lurking just beyond the thin barrier of fabric and glass. For hours, I lay there, eyes wide open, watching shadows crawl across the ceiling, listening to the whispers that seemed to seep through the walls. The face in the window haunted my thoughts, its grin burned into my memory like a scar. Sleep was a distant dream, and I knew that whatever had taken an interest in me wasn't going to let go easily. In the cold light of dawn, as the sun crept over the horizon, I finally found the courage to approach the window again. My hands trembled as I pulled the curtains aside, heart thundering in my chest. Face was gone, replaced by the familiar view of the street below, empty and quiet as if the world hadn't changed overnight. But I knew better. I knew that the shadows held secrets. The darkness was alive with things beyond my understanding. And as I stood there watching the day unfold, I realized that whatever had found me wasn't finished. It was just beginning, and it was determined to unravel every thread of sanity I had left. Days passed, and I found myself drowning in a sea of dread that grew with each tick of the clock. I tried to go about my life as normally as possible, attending classes, pretending to listen during lectures, nodding along as my professors droned on about things I couldn't even pretend to care about. But all the while, my mind was consumed by thoughts of that face, ghastly grin etched into my consciousness like a brand. The apartment became my prison, its once familiar walls closing in on me with a suffocating grip. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind seemed to echo with the sinister promise of the unknown. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, trapped by the shadows that danced just beyond the reach of the light. At night, when the world outside was cloaked in darkness, the feeling of being watched returned with a vengeance. It wrapped around me like a shroud, oppressive and relentless, driving me to the brink of madness. I began to hear things that shouldn't have been there, soft whispers that curled around the corners of my mind, taunting and teasing with their unintelligible promises. Sleep was elusive, a distant memory that slipped through my fingers like sand. I lay awake for hours, eyes fixed on the ceiling, watching as shadows twisted and writhed in the dim glow of the streetlight. The room felt alive, like a living entity that was slowly tightening its grip around me, squeezing the sanity from my bones. And then, one night, it happened again. I had been tossing and turning, trying in vain to chase the elusive specter of sleep when I heard it. The faint, almost imperceptible sound of a door creaking open. It was the kind of sound that would normally be lost amidst the ambient noise of the city, but in the stillness of the night, it was as loud as a thunderclap. My heart skipped a beat, my pulse quickening as I strained to hear anything else. Silence, thick and oppressive, hung in the air like a tangible presence. I sat up slowly, the room spinning slightly as I listened for any hint of movement. And then, there it was, a soft, deliberate shuffle. like someone dragging their feet across the hardwood floor. It came from the living room, just beyond the closed door of my bedroom. My throat tightened, a knot of fear lodging itself in my chest as I considered my options. I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in around me, a suffocating cloak that threatened to snuff out any semblance of reason. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, to hide beneath the covers like a child afraid of the monsters under the bed. But I knew that whatever was in my apartment wouldn't simply go away. It wanted something, and it wasn't going to stop until it got what it desired. Swallowing hard, I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood, my feet meeting the cold, unyielding surface of the floor. Each step toward the door felt like a march toward an inevitable doom, my heart pounding in my ears like a relentless drumbeat. My hand trembled as it reached for the doorknob, hesitating for just a moment before twisting it open. The living room was bathed in shadows, the faint glow of the streetlights casting eerie patterns across the walls. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the very room was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I stepped forward, my movements slow and deliberate, scanning the room for any sign of an intruder. It was then that I saw it. The figure standing in the corner, shrouded in darkness. Its outline was barely discernible, a shadow among shadows, but there was no mistaking its presence. It stood there, silent and still, watching me with an intensity that sent shivers racing down my spine. Fear rooted me to the spot, my limbs frozen as if encased in ice. I wanted to run, flee from this waking nightmare, but the figure held me captive with its gaze, pinning me in place with an unseen force. My mind raced, chaotic jumble of thoughts and emotions crashing against each other like waves in a storm. I tried to speak, to demand an explanation. The words caught in my throat, strangled by the suffocating fear that wrapped around me like a vice. All I could do was stand there, locked in a silent standoff with the specter that had invaded my home. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure began to move. It glided forward with a grace that defied explanation, its form shifting and warping in the dim light. The shadows seemed to cling to it, trailing behind like a cloak of darkness. My heart pounded in my chest, frantic rhythm that matched the rising tide of terror threatening to overwhelm me. I stumbled backward, my feet barely finding purchase on the floor as I retreated toward the safety of my bedroom. But the figure followed, relentless in its pursuit, as if drawn to me by some unseen force. I turned and fled, the walls closing in around me as I stumbled back into my room. The door slammed shut behind me with a resounding crash, the sound echoing through the silence like a death knell. I locked it with trembling hands, the flimsy barrier doing little to quell the rising panic that threatened to consume me. For what felt like an eternity, I stood there, pressed against the door, listening for any sign of the intruder. But all I heard was silence, the oppressive quietude stretching on, as if the world itself had paused to witness my descent into madness. I sank to the floor, my back against the door, heart racing like a trapped animal desperate for escape. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe, as if any sudden motion would shatter the fragile illusion of safety I had constructed around myself. Outside, the shadows shifted, their whispers barely audible over the sound of my own ragged breaths. They spoke of secrets too terrible to comprehend, promises made and broken, things better left unspoken. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out their insidious voices. They slithered through the cracks in my mind, wrapping around my thoughts like a vice. Time lost all meaning as I sat there, huddled against the door, waiting for the dawn to bring its salvation. The minutes stretched into hours, each tick of the clock an eternity in its own right. But eventually, the first light of day crept over the horizon, banishing the darkness with its gentle glow. With a trembling hand, I reached for the doorknob and slowly turned it. Click of the lock echoing in the quiet room. I pushed the door open, half expecting to find the figure waiting for me, its malevolent presence poised to drag me into the abyss. The living room was empty, as if the night's events had been nothing more than a fevered dream. The shadows had retreated, leaving no trace of the terror that had held me captive. Yet, I knew better. I knew that the darkness was merely lying in wait, biding its time until the night once again descended upon my apartment. I staggered to the window, the sunlight bathing my face in warmth that did little to chase away the lingering chill. The world outside was unchanged, oblivious to the horrors that lurked within my walls. I felt a pang of jealousy at the normalcy of it all, the mundane routine that continued unabated, while my life teetered on the edge of madness. As I stood there, watching the city come to life, I realized that I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Something was haunting me, something that defied explanation and refused to be banished by reason alone. And unless I found a way to confront it, to face the shadows that whispered my name in the dark, I would remain trapped in this endless cycle of fear and uncertainty. I turned away from the window, a newfound determination settling over me like a shroud. I would find a way to uncover the truth, to unravel the mystery that held me in its grip. But deep down, part of me knew that whatever I discovered, whatever lay hidden in the shadows of my mind, would change me forever. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and paranoia. Every shadow seemed to conceal a threat, every sound a harbinger of doom. I was living on the edge of a knife, caught between the known world and the horrors lurking just beyond its veil. I knew I couldn't continue like this. Something had to give. I spent hours scouring the internet, diving deep into forums and articles that spoke of the supernatural and unexplained. Desperation drove me to places I never thought I'd go, reading about folklore and old legends that seemed too bizarre to be true. Yet, they were the only things that made sense anymore. Only explanations that fit the madness gripping my life. One night, while reading a thread buried deep in an obscure paranormal forum, I stumbled upon a post that sent a chill racing down my spine. It spoke of an entity known as the Nocturna, a creature that thrived on fear and fed off the energy of the anxious and vulnerable. The description matched my experiences perfectly, from the whispers in the shadows to the haunting face in the window. The Nocturna, as the post explained, was a being that attached itself to those teetering on the edge of mental instability. It would whisper secrets in the night, twist reality into a waking nightmare, and slowly drive its victims into madness before consuming them completely. Creature was insidious, its influence subtle yet devastating, like a parasite burrowing into the very soul. As I read, the pieces began to fall into place. The unease, the escalating terror, the feeling of being watched, it all pointed to this malevolent presence. It wasn't just my imagination, there was something real behind the terror that had taken root in my life. Armed with this newfound knowledge, I resolved to confront the Nocturna. It fed on fear, then perhaps the answer lay in facing it head-on, in denying it the sustenance it craved. But how do you stand against something you can't see, can't touch? Something that exists in the very fabric of your nightmares. The following night, I prepared myself as best I could. The apartment was dark, the lights extinguished save for the pale glow of a single candle flickering on the table. I sat in the living room, my heart a steady drumbeat of anticipation and fear, waiting for the entity to reveal itself once more. The silence was oppressive, thick and tangible, pressing down on me like a weight. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. What if I was wrong? What if the creature was something else entirely, something beyond my comprehension? And then it began. Familiar tap, tap, tap against the window. My skin prickled with dread, but I forced myself to remain calm, focus on the task at hand. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation that lay ahead. I turned toward the window, the shadows shifting in the candlelight, and there it was. Face. Its features twisted and warped, eyes like black voids staring into the depths of my soul. The grin stretched impossibly wide, as if taunting me with its presence. For a moment, fear threatened to overwhelm me, but I clung to the knowledge I'd gained, to the hope that I could end this nightmare. "I'm not afraid of you," I whispered, the words barely audible over the pounding of my heart. The face seemed to falter, its grin wavering as if caught off guard. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices rising and falling in a symphony of despair. But I held my ground, refusing to let the creature see my fear. "I know what you are," I continued, my voice growing stronger, fueled by a desperate courage. "You have no power over me." The shadows writhed, a seething mass of darkness swirling around the room. I felt a pressure building, like a storm gathering strength. the air crackling with an energy that defied explanation. But I stood firm, rooted in place by sheer willpower, determined to see this through. The Nocturna's face twisted, its features contorting into something grotesque and unrecognizable. The whispers reached a fever pitch, a chorus of despair that threatened to drown out all reason. But I refused to back down, refused to give in to the fear clawing at my mind. "I won't let you win," I said, the words a defiant cry against the shadows that sought to consume me. "You won't take me." For what felt like an eternity, the room was filled with the clash of light and dark, a battle waged in the silence of my mind. Creature fought to hold its ground, to maintain its grip on my psyche, but I could feel it weakening, its hold slipping with each passing moment. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, pressure lifted. The shadows receded, the whispers fading into nothingness, like echoes of a forgotten nightmare. The face in the window dissolved, its form unraveling until it was nothing more than a wisp of smoke in the air. I stood there, heart pounding in the silence, the room bathed in the soft glow of the candle. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight of fear lifted at last. I took a deep breath, the first in what felt like forever, and felt a sense of peace wash over me. The Nocturna was gone, banished by the power of my resolve, by the strength I'd found in facing my deepest fears. The apartment felt different, the shadows no longer hiding sinister secrets, the walls echoing with a newfound tranquility. But as I stood there, basking in the aftermath of my victory, I knew that the experience had changed me. The fear and anxiety that had once held me captive were still there, lurking beneath the surface, but they no longer had control over me. I had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but the knowledge that such things existed, that they could slip through the cracks in our reality and take root in our minds, would forever remain with me. It was a sobering reminder of the thin line between the known and the unknown, between sanity and madness. I extinguished the candle, its smoke curling into the air like a final farewell to the specter that had haunted my nights. Darkness closed in, but it was no longer a threat. It was simply the absence of light, canvas waiting to be painted with the colors of a new dawn. As I climbed into bed, exhaustion finally overtaking me, I felt a sense of calm settle over my weary mind. The shadows were just shadows, the whispers nothing more than the echoes of a restless mind. I closed my eyes, letting sleep claim me at last, knowing that whatever nightmares lay ahead, I was ready to face them. For in the end, it wasn't the Nocturna that had been my greatest enemy. It was the fear itself. And in confronting it, I had found the courage to reclaim my life, to banish the darkness that had held me in its grip. The night stretched on, quiet and still, the world outside bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. And as I drifted off to sleep, I knew that while the shadows would always be there, I no longer had to fear them. I had faced the unknown and emerged stronger, armed with the knowledge that even the darkest night must give way to the dawn. And in that knowledge, I found a strength I never knew I possessed. A strength that would see me through whatever trials lay ahead. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. I've always hated being alone at night. There's something about the silence, the shadows, and the way the air seems to grow heavier with each passing minute. It sets my nerves on edge. It's like the darkness itself is alive, watching me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I know it sounds paranoid, but if you've ever felt it, truly felt it, you'd understand. Last Friday, I was at home by myself, and I felt that familiar unease creeping in. Tried to brush it off, thinking it was just my imagination running wild. It often does. I settled on the couch with a book, hoping that getting lost in someone else's story would help distract me. But my mind was restless, constantly returning to the unsettling feeling that something was off. Something was watching me. It started with a noise, faint tapping sound coming from the kitchen. Tap, tap, tap. At first, I thought it might be the pipes, or maybe a branch scraping against the window outside. I tried to ignore it, focusing harder on the book, but my eyes kept drifting from the words, drawn to the shadows lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. The noise continued, persistent, almost like a heartbeat, echoing through the otherwise silent house. I closed the book with a frustrated snap and stood up, deciding to investigate. My footsteps felt too loud against the wooden floor as I made my way down the hallway. Tapping stopped as I reached the kitchen, leaving an unnerving silence in its wake. I stood there, straining my ears, waiting for the noise to start again. But all I heard was the faint hum of the refrigerator. I shook my head, chiding myself for being so easily spooked. It was probably nothing, a trick of the acoustics or some mundane household noise. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. The door to the basement was ajar, a narrow strip of darkness gaping like a black hole. I was sure I had closed it earlier. My heart thudded in my chest, a drumbeat of anxiety that matched the earlier tapping. I hesitated, my hand reaching out to push the door shut. As my fingers brushed against the cold wood, a sudden chill swept through me, and a whispered voice seemed to sigh through the air. Barely audible, undeniably there. "Don't go." I jerked my hand back, my breath hitching in my throat. That voice, soft, almost pleading, couldn't be real. It had to be my mind playing tricks on me. I forced myself to take a deep breath, trying to quell the rising panic. Gathering my courage, I stepped forward and peered into the basement's shadows. Nothing but darkness greeted me, thick and impenetrable. Yet, the sense of being watched was stronger than ever, pressing down on me like a weight. I slammed the door shut, my fingers trembling on the handle as I locked it securely. Back in the living room, I tried to shake off the feeling of unease. I told myself it was all in my head, that I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The house felt different, as if it had been waiting for the cover of night to reveal its true nature. As the clock ticked on, the atmosphere grew heavier, and the shadows seemed to lengthen, stretching their fingers across the room. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside made me jump, my imagination conjuring images of things lurking just out of sight. Couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The sensation of eyes watching me was palpable, like an itch I couldn't scratch. And then, just when I thought I might be able to calm myself, tapping started again. Closer this time, coming from the other side of the wall right behind me. Tap, tap, tap. I spun around, heart pounding, staring at the wall as if expecting it to come alive. The sound was relentless, insistent, as if trying to communicate something, some dark secret hidden within the house's bones. With a growing sense of dread, I knew that this night was far from over. Whatever was haunting me wasn't finished yet. And as the shadows closed in, I realized with chilling certainty that my worst fears were coming true. I wasn't alone, and whatever was with me wasn't going to leave until it got what it wanted. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with every creak and groan of the house. By morning, I was exhausted, but the oppressive feeling of dread lingered like a shadow. I tried to convince myself that it was just the anxiety from the previous night. Deep down, I knew something was wrong. Over the next few days, the disturbances became more frequent and more unnerving. It was as if whatever was haunting me had decided to escalate its game. I'd be going about my day, only to hear a faint noise, thud, a scrape, coming from somewhere in the house. It was always just out of sight, always just beyond my reach. One evening, as I was sitting on the couch trying to watch TV, the lights flickered ominously. I glanced around trying to find a logical explanation, but the power stayed on. My phone buzzed with a notification, breaking the silence. I picked it up, thinking it was a message from a friend or family member. Instead, I found a missed call from an unknown number. Curiosity got the better of me, and I dialed the number back. The call connected, but there was no one on the other end, just static, filled with an eerie crackling noise that made my skin crawl. I hung up, my heart racing. What kind of sick prank was this, or was it something more sinister? As I was about to put my phone down, a chill ran down my spine. I turned slowly to look at the window beside me, where a phrase was written in the condensation, "I'm not alone." The message was scrawled with a jagged, almost frantic hand, letters smeared and uneven. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the words were meant for me. My head spun, trying to process what I was seeing. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the light or my imagination playing tricks on me. But the message was real, and it was clear. Something or someone was trying to communicate with me, and it was using my own home as its canvas. As the days wore on, the occurrences grew bolder. One night, I was lying in bed, trying to drown out the fear with a podcast, when I heard a soft whispering coming from the dark corners of the room. It was so faint that I almost thought I was imagining it, but then I heard my name. Will. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The whisper was gone as quickly as it had come, leaving me in a suffocating silence. I switched on the bedside lamp and scanned the room, but there was nothing there. Nothing but the oppressive dark that seemed to stretch and contract with every breath I took. Determined to find some semblance of normalcy, I decided to have a quiet dinner alone. I set the table, my hands shaking slightly as I placed the plates and utensils. I tried to ignore the growing sense of unease, focusing on the mundane task of eating. But as I sat down, I noticed the kitchen door, the one I had securely locked, was ajar again. A sense of dread washed over me as I approached the door. Creaked open with a groan, revealing the empty, shadowed space beyond. Tapping sound from the other night had returned, now coming from within the walls. Tap, tap, tap. It was rhythmic, like a heartbeat that grew louder and more insistent the closer I got. I tried to rationalize it, but every logical explanation crumbled in the face of my mounting terror. I reached for the door to close it, but as I did, cold breeze rushed past me, and the lights flickered ominously. I stumbled back, heart racing, feeling as though something unseen was trying to reach out and grab me. Desperate for answers, I began searching the house, hoping to find some clue that would explain what was happening. The sensation of being watched grew stronger with every step I took. I felt like a puppet on invisible strings, manipulated by an unseen hand. Every shadow seemed to move, every creak of the floorboards echoed with an eerie resonance. It was clear that whatever was tormenting me was not just a figment of my imagination. It was real, and it was feeding off my fear, growing bolder with each passing night. I returned to the living room, my thoughts racing. The message on the window, the whispers, tapping, they were all connected. Part of a dark puzzle I was struggling to piece together. And as I sat there, alone in the growing darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The nights grew longer, and the darkness seemed to thicken around me, pressing in on all sides. I could barely sleep anymore, my nights a torturous cycle of fitful rest interrupted by bone-chilling terror. It was as if the house itself was conspiring against me. Every creak and whisper a reminder that I was not alone. Last night was the worst yet. The storm had rolled in suddenly, its fury unleashing a deluge of rain and wind that battered the windows. I could hear the howling wind and the relentless pounding of the rain on the roof. The storm added a layer of chaos to the already eerie atmosphere, turning every sound into a potential threat. Power flickered and went out, plunging the house into complete darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands trembling as I switched it on. The beam of light cut through the dark, revealing the familiar shapes of my living room, now distorted by the flickering light. The shadows danced and twisted on the walls, creating grotesque shapes that seemed to move with a life of their own. The darkness was absolute, but I could still hear it. Whispers, faint and unintelligible, coming from all directions. I strained my ears, trying to make sense of the disembodied voices. They were too soft to distinguish, but their presence was undeniable. The whispers seemed to come closer, as if something or someone was moving just beyond the edge of the light. My anxiety spiked when I heard a sudden crash from the basement. It was a loud, shattering noise that seemed to reverberate through the entire house. My flashlight beam shook as I turned it toward the basement door, which stood slightly ajar. I hadn't opened it, and the fact that it was now open made my skin crawl. With every ounce of courage I could muster, I approached the door. The storm outside roared louder, almost as if it was trying to drown out the noises coming from within the house. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they became a cacophony of indistinguishable voices. I could barely keep myself from turning and fleeing. I took a deep breath and pushed the basement door open. The steps leading down into the darkness seemed to stretch endlessly. I descended slowly, each step echoing ominously. The basement was pitch black, the flashlight illuminating only a small circle of the oppressive gloom. The air was cold and musty, thick with the scent of mold and decay. At the bottom of the stairs, I noticed something unsettling. Old furniture and boxes in the basement were scattered, as if someone had been searching through them in a frenzy. My heart pounded as I scanned the room, my light catching on something that made me gasp. A journal lying open on the floor, its pages fluttering as if moved by an unseen hand. I hesitated, finally approached the journal. It was a worn leather book, pages yellowed with age. I picked it up, my hands shaking. The entries were scrawled in a frantic, almost illegible hand. The diary belonged to someone who had lived here long before me. Their words described similar experiences, voices in the dark, objects moving on their own, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. One entry stood out, written in hurried, jagged letters. It watches you. It wants you to be afraid. The more you fear, the stronger it gets. My breath caught in my throat as I read the entry. It was as if the writer had been speaking directly to me, warning me about the very thing I was now experiencing. Just then, the lights flickered back on, and I felt a rush of relief. But as I turned to head back upstairs, I froze. Basement door slammed shut with a deafening bang. I tried to open it, but it was locked, firmly, as if sealed by an invisible force. Panic set in as I realized I was trapped. Whispers grew louder, merging into a single, agonized wail that seemed to come from every direction. I could feel the air growing colder, and a shadowy figure began to materialize in the corner of the basement, its form shifting and undulating. It was as if the darkness itself had taken shape, a manifestation of my deepest fears. I tried to call for help, but my voice was swallowed by the oppressive noise. My flashlight flickered and went out, leaving me in pitch blackness, figure drawing closer. I stumbled back, feeling the icy breath of the entity on my neck. My fear was palpable, a living thing that seemed to feed off my terror. With a final burst of adrenaline, I slammed my body against the basement door, praying it would give way. The door burst open with a splintering crack, and I scrambled up the stairs, my heart pounding as I fled the basement. I didn't look back as I ran through the house, desperately seeking safety. The storm outside had calmed to a whisper by the time I collapsed on the living room floor, shaking uncontrollably. I was alone again, but the sense of being watched was stronger than ever. I knew one thing for certain. Whatever was tormenting me was growing more powerful, and it wouldn't stop until it had broken me completely. I barely slept a wink that night, my mind replaying the terrifying events in the basement. My thoughts were a jumbled mess of fear and confusion. I knew I needed answers, but every time I tried to think clearly, my thoughts were clouded by the shadows that seemed to loom around me. The next day, I decided to investigate the history of the house, hoping to find some clue that might explain the malevolent presence. I visited the local library, combing through old records and newspapers. The librarian, an elderly woman with a kind smile, helped me locate archived files about previous occupants. As I pored over the documents, I came across an old newspaper article that caught my eye. It was dated several decades ago and detailed the mysterious disappearance of a family who had lived in my house. The article mentioned strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena that drove the family to the brink of madness, for they vanished without a trace. The article's description of their experiences matched mine with unnerving accuracy. They spoke of whispers in the dark, objects moving on their own, and an oppressive presence that seemed to grow stronger with their fear. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that their story was strikingly similar to my own. Armed with this new information, I returned home, determined to find more clues. I went back to the basement, the place where I had found the diary. With a growing sense of dread, I sifted through the clutter, searching for anything that might shed more light on the house's dark history. In the far corner of the basement, behind a stack of old boxes, I discovered a hidden compartment in the wall. Inside, I found an old, dusty box filled with personal belongings, photos, letters, and a faded, leather-bound journal. The journal's cover was embossed with a strange symbol, one that I'd seen in the diary from before. Opening the journal, I was struck by the detailed entry. The previous occupant described their encounters with the entity in increasingly frantic terms. They spoke of a malevolent spirit that fed on fear and sought to consume its victim's sanity. Each entry grew more desperate, until the final page, which was scrawled with a chilling warning. It's not over. It will follow you. It wants to consume you. My blood ran cold as I realized the full extent of the danger I was facing. This spirit was not just haunting my house, it was actively tormenting me, trying to drive me to the same fate as its previous victims. It thrived on fear, using it to grow stronger and more malevolent. Desperate for answers, I turned to the internet, researching any information I could find about the symbol and the spirit. What I found was both horrifying and enlightening. The symbol was an ancient sigil associated with summoning and binding spirits, often used by occult practitioners to control malevolent entities. The fact that it was found in the journal suggested that someone had tried to control or contain the spirit, but their efforts had clearly failed. I realized with a sinking feeling that the spirit was not merely a haunting, was an active, malevolent force with a clear intent to possess and consume. The previous occupants had failed to contain it, and now it had latched onto me, drawing strength from my fear and growing more powerful by the day. As night fell, the atmosphere in the house grew heavier, the shadows lengthening and twisting with a life of their own. I knew that whatever was tormenting me was preparing for something. The fear that had gripped me was now intertwined with a grim sense of foreboding. Sitting in the dim light of a single candle, I felt the weight of the house's dark history pressing down on me. I knew I needed to confront the entity directly, find a way to break its hold over me before it was too late. The warning in the journal echoed in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. I took a deep breath and prepared myself for whatever was to come. The darkness outside seemed to close in around the house, and I could sense the presence of the spirit growing stronger. The whispers from the night before were now a constant murmur in the background, as if the entity was already gearing up for its final confrontation. I had no idea what awaited me, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to face it. The house, the spirit, and the terror had all become too intertwined to ignore. Whatever was coming, I had to confront it head-on, or I would become just another chapter in the house's tragic history. The night descended like a shroud over the house, and with it, the oppressive sense of dread seemed to reach its peak. I felt the weight of the entity's presence pressing down on me, more palpable and suffocating than ever before. The whispers in the darkness had grown louder, more insistent, their voices blending into a dissonant symphony of terror. I prepared myself for the final confrontation, knowing that I couldn't let the spirit's growing power overwhelm me. I gathered everything I could find about the ancient symbol and the spirit's history, hoping that knowledge might give me an edge. Armed with the journal, candles, and a few protective charms I'd managed to find, I set up a makeshift ritual space in the living room. As I arranged the candles in a circle, their flickering flames cast eerie shadows on the walls. The storm outside had picked up again, its wind howling and rattling the windows. It felt as though the storm was a reflection of the chaos within the house, amplifying the sense of impending doom. I began to recite the protective incantations I'd found in my research, my voice trembling but determined. The words felt foreign on my tongue, but I forced myself to speak with conviction, hoping to ward off the malevolent force. The air grew colder, and the whispers grew more frantic, almost as if the spirit was trying to drown out my efforts. Suddenly, the temperature dropped sharply. My breath came out in visible puffs, and I felt an icy chill seep into my bones. The candles flickered violently, casting erratic shadows that seemed to twist and writhe. I could sense the presence of the spirit drawing closer, its malevolent energy pressing against the barrier I was trying to create. I heard a loud crash from the hallway, and the lights flickered out again, plunging the room into darkness. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to remain focused. I reached for the flashlight, the beam cutting through the blackness and revealing the ghostly figure that now stood at the edge of the circle. Its form was dark and shifting, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. With every ounce of strength I had left, I continued to recite the incantations. The spirit's presence was overwhelming, its whispers now a deafening roar in my ears. I could feel its anger and desperation as it fought against the protective barrier I had created. The air was thick with its hatred, and I could see the figure's distorted face contorting in fury. In a final, desperate attempt, I raised the journal and began reading the passage that warned of the spirit's power. I could only hope that the words would have some effect, that they would somehow weaken the entity's grip on the house. As I finished reading, temperature in the room plummeted even further. The spirit let out a guttural, inhuman wail that shook the very foundations of the house. The walls seemed to vibrate with the force of its cry, and I could feel the ground beneath me trembling. Candles flickered wildly, and for a moment everything seemed to blur together in a chaotic dance of light and shadow. Just when I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, the entity's wail abruptly cut off. The oppressive energy that had filled the room began to dissipate, and the temperature slowly returned to normal. The figure in the darkness began to fade, its form dissolving into the shadows. The storm outside finally began to wane, its fury giving way to a profound silence. The whispers that had tormented me for so long were gone, replaced by an eerie calm. The house, once so heavy with dread, now seemed almost peaceful. Exhausted and trembling, I collapsed onto the floor, the weight of the confrontation finally lifting. The house was quiet, and the darkness that had once seemed so malevolent now felt benign. I knew that I had faced the spirit and survived. The experience had changed me forever. As I looked around the living room, now bathed in the gentle light of the morning sun, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had merely driven the spirit away, not destroyed it. The house was still old and mysterious, its history a dark shadow that would always linger. I decided to leave, find a new place where the ghosts of the past could no longer reach me. The house would remain behind, a reminder of the terror that had once lived within its walls. And though I hoped that the spirit would never find its way back, I knew that the fear and the memories would stay with me forever. In the end, the house was free from its tormentor, and so was I. But as I closed the door for the last time, I couldn't help but feel a shiver of unease. The darkness may have receded, but the echoes of the past would always linger, a chilling reminder of the horror once was. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed these chilling stories as much as I enjoyed sharing them with you. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel and give us a thumbs up to keep the terror coming. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring even more spine-tingling content your way. Before you go, don't forget to check out the video playing on the screen. It's packed with more unsettling tales and eerie experiences that you won't want to miss. If you have any frightening stories of your own or suggestions for future content, drop them in the comments below. Stay tuned for more haunting adventures. Until next time, sleep tight. Decant.